So Israel might have just pulled the greatest judo move of all times, using Hamas's trap against it to put an end to Hamas and Hezbollah at the same time. Absolutely insane. Trust me, you want to hear what I have to say in this video. On the one hand, the Israelis have put in motion finally their cantonization plan for Gaza, which I talked about back in November, telling you this is what's going to happen. At the same time, Yahya Sinwar and Hamas are trying one last Hail Mary that, if succeeds and traps the Israelis, might change the course of the war. So there's a lot of moving parts. Stay with me. This is about to get interesting. So let's start with Yahya Sinwar and Hamas. Right now, Yahya Sinwar and Hamas have been pushed into their last stronghold, the southern border with Egypt called Rafah. That place is the place through which all this contraband went into Gaza for the past 20 years. The machine guns, the IEDs, the bombs, the grenades, it all came from Egypt to Gaza through that crossing underground, in underground tunnels, massive tunnels. You can drive through a tunnel with a car, with a tractor. I mean, absolutely insane engineering. If only the Palestinians have used this engineering to actually build bomb shelters for their people and actual infrastructure, but that's a topic for a different video. So while Hamas is holding on to power in Rafah, that's their last stronghold, the Israelis are in a little bit of a pickle, in a little bit of a juncture here, because on the one hand, they know that once they take Rafah, and once they actually eliminate the civilian rule of Hamas in Rafah, there's nothing left for Hamas as a civilian organization, as a ruler of Gaza, which is something that the IDF is very interested in because it's going to make the fighting a lot easier. Because when Hamas does not have the civilian capabilities, the civilian population, and the infrastructure, it's going to be a different ballgame. It will also allow the Israelis to seal the passage of contraband weaponry from Egypt into Gaza by taking over that border, that Philadelphia route, which I talked to you about many, many times in the previous videos. But the thing with this whole region is that it's not that simple. While the IDF militarily is able to do so, herein lies the problem. That region is packed with refugees. Couple million people are basically located in that region, which makes any military operation there very, very complicated, very unpopular, and Israel is already faced with a lot of international pressure. On top of it, in a few days, the holiest month for the Muslim people starts, the Ramadan month, in about 4 days. And when that starts, tensions become extremely high. A lot of craziness can happen. So the Israelis are basically sitting on a huge powder keg that is that Rafah crossing, trying to figure out what to do with it. They haven't decided yet. They've been dragging their feet because it's a complicated decision. On the other hand, they have started to carry out their cantonization plan for the rest of Gaza. As I mentioned back in November, they have started basically giving out aid to local families that control regions in Gaza. 5 different sectors, 5 different families. Some of them hate the guts of Hamas, by the way. And they're essentially creating a civilian rule, which is an alternative to Hamas in Gaza, by giving them the food, giving them the aid, and giving them the responsibility to manage everyday life, the sewer, the trash, and whatnot. Now, the cantonization plan is the end game for the Israelis, it seems like. And it seems like the best choice because they don't want Hamas, they don't want the Palestinian Authority. This cantonization plan is the best of all horrible options for the Israelis. But as Hamas watches this, and they see the beginning of the downfall of their civilian hold over Gaza, they understand that once this plan goes beyond just a distribution of the humanitarian aid, this goes into full-blown civilian administration backed by the Israelis, it's going to be very hard for Hamas to actually use that infrastructure, and they will be back to being a guerrilla organization. They don't want that. So Hamas is saying to themselves, look, right now we have 4 days left before the holiest of the holiest months start, before everybody gets so on edge, before the things are primed to explode. Because Hamas does not care about the civilian population, they care about something crazy happening. The wet dream of Hamas, so to speak, was, and still is to get the West Bank, which is absolutely on the other side of the territory, to fire up and go against Israel from a second front. They have not been successful in doing so until this point. But now they're saying to themselves, look, so if that's the case, Yahya Sinwar understands that his best bet to survive this, although not a very high chance, but his only Hail Mary, is to make it through the next 4 days into the Ramadan month and then get the Israelis to attack and then fire up the entire region, possibly getting the West Bank and East Jerusalem and maybe even local Arab Israelis to participate against Israel, basically fire up the entire Middle East. So for that to happen, he needs to get to the Ramadan month, which is not that easy because the Israelis are moving at a very quick pace and they may launch that attack on Rafah at any given moment, even right now. So what he's been doing is negotiating with the Israelis about the potential release of the 150 hostages he still has. Excuse me if I got the hostage number wrong, but 150, 160. And he's essentially been dragging his feet and making impossible demands, which he knows the Israelis can't accept, with one reason, which is to stall and get the Israelis to get to Ramadan and then have to act during the Ramadan month, causing the entire region potentially to explode. And on top of it, I think what we learned from this is that if he can afford to do this, and he is definitely showing that he can afford to wait, it means that the Israelis has not been hitting him hard enough. It's a fact. Because at the end of the day, if the Israelis would have hit Hamas hard enough by now, I think Yahya Sinwar would have been begging for some sort of a ceasefire. But the fact that he hasn't yet shows us that the Israelis did not actually hit hard enough. Now, the crazy part about this whole thing is both the Benjamin Netanyahu and Yahya Sinwar leadership is running on borrowed time. While Benjamin Netanyahu becomes extremely unpopular in Israel, more and more as people protest, as people demand the release of the hostages, as people start to ask the questions about how he failed as a leader potentially in October 7th, etc., 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 the Hamas street is basically bubbling up saying, hey, what did you do to us? On the other hand, on the Israeli side, there's a lot of discontent about the fact that the hostages have not been released yet, that Yahya Sinwar is still alive. So both leaders are essentially playing against a clock, and they have to get some achievements. Now, who will get the upper hand here? God knows. I don't know. But the one thing I can tell you, that the Israelis have a decision to make right now, and it's a complicated decision. That's why you heard the Israelis all of a sudden today make an ultimatum to Hizbollah, of all places. So as Sinwar is trying to create a situation when the Israelis go into Rafah and cause mayhem, but not now, in a few days, during the Ramadan month, the Israelis are countering this play with their own, essentially issuing an ultimatum to the Hizbollah in the north, saying, hey, you got a week, which is essentially the beginning of Ramadan, to go back to where the UN Security Council told you have to be, get away from the fence, get away from the border, or in 7 days, we will go crazy and absolutely annihilate the shit out of you. Now, while this threat may be a bluff, it shows you what the Israelis are trying to do. They're essentially aiming their wrath right now towards the Hizbollah, which they let absolutely go crazy and bomb the shit out of North Israel for the past few months. All of a sudden, they're setting an ultimatum. Why? What they seem to be doing here is essentially creating an alternative. They're saying, hey, we don't want to go there during Ramadan month, go into a densely populated area and fire up the entire Middle East, especially when everybody's saying that we're crazy for doing that. On the other hand, we can't just sit idle because our own people internally, politically, are going to annihilate the government. So we have to find a new way to use that time, that 1 month time, to do something productive so that the internal street in Israel does not pressure against Benjamin Netanyahu too hard. So what the Israelis have done with this ultimatum, which conveniently starts with the Ramadan, is say, hey, Hezbollah, you got a week to get off the fence, to get off the border. If not, we're going to screw the living crap out of you. Now, obviously, Hezbollah ain't going nowhere. They're not going to go anywhere because the Israelis have showed them the inability to act. When the Israelis gave away the gas rates for nothing to Hezbollah, essentially showing them that they're afraid of Hezbollah, Hezbollah have realized that the Israelis are not going to do jack shit. At least that's what they think. So the Hezbollah will test the seriousness of this ultimatum for sure. And the Israelis, I think, understand it. And they understand that while they can go inside Rafah and cause a mayhem in Ramadan month and fire up the entire Middle East, alternatively what they can do is let Yahya Sinwar and Hamas simmer in their own Ramadan inside Gaza for a whole month and basically say to themselves, you know what, Hamas, we'll see you back in April. You sit tight right here. We're not going to do a jack shit in Ramadan. Go right ahead. In the meanwhile, we're going to go up north and handle Hezbollah, which we should have for a long time, but we couldn't because we were fighting two fronts. So now that we're not going to do a jack shit in Gaza, we have all these resources, all this time, we can focus on 1 month on getting Hezbollah off the border, which is exactly what we needed. So while Hamas is trying to get the Israelis to go inside Gaza during the Ramadan month, potentially, hopefully for Hamas to cause a massive humanitarian crisis, fire up the entire region, the Israelis are saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're not crazy. We're going to let you sit tight here for a whole month. We're not going to do anything. In the meanwhile, we're going to send all our helicopters, our planes, and all the available men we have that we don't need to keep you in check here for a whole month up north to handle Hezbollah. So essentially, they have made lemonade out of the lemons. Sinwar essentially gave them a month off, which they're going to use potentially to hammer Hezbollah, at least according to the threat that just issued. We'll find out in a week. Now, if you want to support the work we do here, join the Patreon, patreon.com/TomNashReport. I'd really appreciate it because these videos are mostly not fully monetized because of the nature of the things we're talking about here. For those who already joined, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. You guys are the best. I do appreciate every single one of you. I'll see you in the next video.